Daniela, you have the virtual floor.
Okay. Well, again, Artur, nice to see you in Rockit community, and nice to see you online in this time of isolation. Um, so I'm speaking from Moldova, but I do want to say hello to friends logging in from faraway places and different time zones. I know some of them are on the other side of Asia and others in the US, as well as the speakers coming up later on in the days. I'm looking forward to hearing from some of them I haven't been in touch with in a long time. So about a short background on me, I will try to share with you today some of my lessons learned in a path that I took from private sector venture capital work at the beginning of my career, and in the place that I ended up now, which is international development, and really try to offer some solutions about grant funding for social enterprises. I do believe that somewhere in between this private sector towards the public sector, long way, and also different values and different way of working, there is a place where we can meet. Especially, I know that the civic and the public service drive that we have and the passion that moves us, a lot of us in our culture, in our region, are moved by civic initiatives, by public service and public interest. And so I know that we often want to combine the private sector excellence, efficiency, competitiveness, profit, why not, market leadership, with the public sector feel good, right? The impact, the high impact, the wide reach, and really core services that truly affect people's lives. And this is what drove me to make this step and accommodate and I guess change career and follow the education that I did, get my license and master's in government and international relations. And study these international organizations, study donors and the way that international development works. So just a quick background on the grants and type of funding that I'll talk about. I work now as a development consultant at the Ziarul de Gardă, which is one of the development unicorns in Moldova, if I can call them so. It's one of the fastest growing media organizations, and it is supported by a big number of donors and partners. I will be sharing a few details at the end with a shout out to my team. So I'll be talking about grants from a media perspective a bit. Before this, I did participate and apply for grants and tenders on behalf of media and PR companies, agencies, communication agencies. So I can mention a bit about that, even as far as film financing, and a little bit of experience in Romania's kind of structural funds that moved grants a step further into the subsidies world of private companies. So startups, enterprises that are not NGOs, that are profit driven, but are funded by state or development organizations, and there's a big place for that I want to stop and spend some time on. So I'll be sharing my presentation. Hopefully it works. A presentation. I wanted to start with a little cut from Rockit's pitch at the beginning. You saw. So I don't take more time to cut logos and put there a bunch of donors, international organization. I just found a shortcut. Look at all the funders behind Rockit. But really behind a lot of organizations, companies in Moldova, we are familiar with these logos. We see them really backing a lot of our NGOs and private companies. So, and I threw in a couple of more here around the Rockit supporters. And so I wanted to start with the pitch to you to think that, and I'm glad I spoke after Vasile, who mentioned venture capital and his fund that funds high growth unicorn companies, because I do believe now it's a time where we're experiencing some big changes at the global level of it changes in the sizes and intervention of governments in the economy, which are unprecedented. I mean, as we speak, right, in the US, I mean, the biggest government bailout ever is happening, over $2 trillion, compared to what we experienced in 2008 in the crisis that affected us all. That was only 800 billion. And in fact, much less was spent in the TARP, trouble asset recovery bailout back then in the US. So right now, 2 trillion in the US, half a trillion in Europe is what's discussed. In Romania, Romania's discussions with Europe, they're already trying to set up different funds as part of this state help towards companies, towards organizations that will help keep the economy working. And so why do I want to start with this? Because of course, we experiencing especially the 2000 and the opening of markets, or the 90s, first of all, for our region, for former Soviet Union, a capitalist wave and the opening of markets really made us very strong, believers in efficient markets, in economics, the laws of economics, and in the model of American capitalism, which includes the startup promise, which includes high risk funding models like venture capital. However, I think ever since then, really, and especially in a more accelerated way since 2008, we've seen these markets shrink and experience some inefficiencies, and government stepping in instead. And when government steps in, it's positive and negative at the same time. As I mentioned, we like some things in public, we like some things in private. The same with what we hate. Public money and government interventions really skew markets, are slow, are inefficient, are sometimes subjective. I mean, you can argue here about merits and really driving the most competitive solutions and offers out there. So it comes with most people, I guess, can see it negative, really, because it's taking a step back from the promise of the clean capitalist model of economic growth and of the supply and demand, and really that nice offer the company can give just by what the consumers want. So when I look at and even personally, in my experience, I did spend time right between and at the beginning of the financial crisis in venture capital, and that was affected a lot into what they funded back then, the type of companies, the type of risk that they were willing to take. And I think back then people were a lot more reticent to talk about government funding, subsidies, or international development. And especially when we talk about different markets, I mean, it depends about the maturity of the market you're in. If you're in the Western markets, the more developed, the more resilience they might have. And if you're in further out east, not necessarily towards former Soviet Union, but I'm even talking about Northern Europe, where more socialist models are out. Then you'll find a lot more government involvement, government opportunities, state subsidies, that companies, as long as social enterprises or civically minded organizations, are targeting. So I hope I hope I convinced some of you what this will that it's worth thinking about state funding and development funding. And I put them in the same bucket, because development funding for us, I mean, it's foreign state funding, really. I mean, in states that have in developing markets, developing states like Moldova, there's still a lot of other foreign states getting involved to fund us, as, let's say, we might not have the same capacity to fund, and we don't have such big programs inside our own Ministry of Economy or our own entrepreneurship and company and NGO or civil society support. So that's why I do mention them together. And so what I wanted to convince you of, and I know a lot of people might be reticent towards it, is that there's a space out there for companies to look at public funding, and there's a place for NGOs and civil society to look at private funding. And I think as people have gone over and over same old models and pitches, they do want to find something new. For example, you've heard international development organizations keep opening innovation labs, entrepreneurship, seeding people. And so this is really a cry out to say we're looking for more efficiency and more efficient models than previous civic organizations or NGOs were able to offer. So we wanted to look out to the private sector. And so they're funding a lot more private companies. My big discovery also the last years were to find out how many of these grants actually fund non-NGOs, when it looks typically like it would have been an NGO a couple of years ago, but it starts to be CRLs, so LLCs, which I think is a wonderful step towards efficient grant making and efficient development, and vice versa. Companies that believe that they could access venture capital, investor money, or private investor or loans can consider grants and development partners or subsidies in addition to those two to help them reach that point. Because I do think it's hard to argue that sure everybody wants to be a unicorn and follow the high growth path. We'll see. It's a rare story, and for everybody else, you still have the job as entrepreneur of job creation, of creating an organization, of keeping a team. And so you have to be creative about the funding sources you look at for that. Everybody else who's not growing 100% year over year. So I just threw there some logos, but I do want to show you a bit about the dark web of international development. A lot of these names in these lists will be obscure. GOPA Consulting, GFA Consulting, DAI. There's a whole industry of actually development organizations that are private, who are contractors or private sector partners of the large development arms of states. So when the United States, the UK, states in the OECD that support the developing world go out to make projects and grants, go out to deploy money, they work most of the time through large private sector consulting companies. And so one of the things you start learning is, if you want a heads up of what's coming up in your region, in your country, and you don't want to wait for what I have on the next slide, which is the bulletins, these immediate bulletins that just say, hey, look out, there's a call for a 40,000 grant or a $300,000 grant on this, on environment, on gender, on for startups. And if you don't want to kind of get in that late and you want to know a bit ahead of time, let's see where they're all coming from. So they're coming from the large projects, multi-million-dollar projects, and you can see here usually their sites and bulletins with the latest procurements, by region, by amount, by company implementing. That's nice. That's the first slide. That's a big pitch for Rockit, Artur.
Thank you. Now we are donors and grantees.
Okay, so this is the slide with what I was mentioning, the obscure names of that you might have not known. They might not be out there marketing themselves. They are in the kind of large corporations, but in this industry. But maybe you want to get to know them. Maybe you want to read up what's coming up. So UK's DFID or USAID or let's say Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belgium or Netherlands would be working then with foundations or private consulting companies that help deploy and help subcontract grants out into developing world. And so there's less and less, I think it's split. Some of the projects are direct. Of course, you see USAID projects directly implemented in Moldova or other countries. But there's a lot of other times when you say funded by other companies, and you might not know that USAID is behind them, right? or there's a lot of other donors behind them. So, for example, Ziar de Garda has funders, Internews, which is a project supported by USAID, or actually USAID even supports Freedom Press Unlimited, I think I saw, and Millennium DPI partners. So these are companies that you might not associate right away with this funder, but they are. So a lot of this money is counted as official direct official development assistance, and we can see it in the grants that comes into Moldova. So, for example, here actually I put in the official development assistance when it comes from the budgets of these foreign countries that support developing countries. Yeah, again, we can see who supports us most. I put some flags out. This data, I mean, is not cumulative or up to date, is not a rank, but just to know where you're looking out for. If Sweden is up there, and we do see Sweden all over the place, we see this logo everywhere, supporting companies in Moldova. That means you probably want to look at what the calls are, what the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the embassy, the local embassy, and then the partners that they work through are doing or announcing. Same with the US or UK, Germany. I'll go back. I hope the slides are moving with me now. I'll go back here just for a bit to mention that the big names, I mean, you'll see are DFID, USAID, GIZ in Moldova. But of course, the ministries themselves and the foreign and the embassies locally. And not to forget the multilateral development organizations that you're all familiar with. You want to follow those boards. And of course, something a bit harder because there's so many and so specialized is the private companies and foundations. So I can just share a few insights into what I've been doing, looking at media, who's funding media in the last year. And I found the breadth of companies. I mean, from companies that I mentioned, like Free Press Unlimited in Netherlands, who actually has a $13 million annual revenue supporting over 60 media companies all over the world, among them is Ziar de Garda. This is an example. It's a foundation. It's known just to the media sector. And I mean, I think each sector has its own specialty. But for example, in the media sector, actually, who jumped in lately this year were Google and Facebook created Google News Initiative, a large fund to support local media organizations in the developing world, including, and Facebook as well. In fact, last month, I think we did apply to a Facebook-funded European Journalist Center fund. It was a COVID fast response fund, but they are involved and they are interested in giving out development money as foundations, as their foundation part. Some of there are private companies you know about, and we use them as users, and they set up foundations to go out and fund. Others are just foundations like charity foundations that actually, that the whole purpose is development. And here it's Open Society, Soros Foundation, or Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation. And so these are, again, difficult to understand. They have, they're organizing their work and calls and projects by fields. So you want to look at, I think I do recommend here always starting from what the field is moving out, because otherwise it's a lot of information to look at, and maybe it's not so helpful for your business. So try to define first where you're starting to look from, whether it's you're a media company, an NGO, or a business, and define loosely the themes. You're looking at startup and entrepreneurship topics, you're looking at gender, environment, you're looking at education or health, social, and then it will be a bit easier to sift through the multiple and overwhelming number of opportunities out there. If we're on a slide with bulletins, I just had to give a shout out to Chivik. I'm there, of course, in Moldova. If you're missing anything else, here is the last moment where you catch all the calls on all the topics. And for people, I think people here widely use this resource, and it's very useful for grant calls. And so already on this page, I think it's one on environment, one on culture, media, women rights, agriculture, and including agriculture communication, and also entrepreneurship. So there's some diversity of topics. And in Romania, because I do want to switch to Romania for the next few minutes, um, there's something also. There's a small resource like startup cafe. So is this moving along with me? The slides?
Yes, it's moving.
Yes. Okay, good. So Startup Cafe in Romania, even though it's dedicated for startups and entrepreneurs, actually most read articles always are about European funds, always are about structural funds and calls and projects and guides. So it's a mix. And why did I? And so let's talk a bit about this path that I do see from Moldova as well, of development and growth from NGO to SRL, to LLC. As you see modeled on Romania, that was a developing market years ago, and then I joined the EU, and let's say it's still receiving aid and structural funds to develop, but it's considered upscale from Moldova. The move there was that a few fields remain funded by development initiatives, by the typical development donors that I just mentioned until now, but most things have moved into the area of structural funding for companies. And so maybe less commercial fields like culture, education, sometimes edgy science innovations or environmental initiatives are also funded still by grants and NGOs, through NGOs, I mean. But the rest have moved into these large funds that support job creation and startups and companies, small to medium to large to any type of enterprise. So Startup Cafe, like I mentioned, is a resource guiding people, and through the bureaucracy of it, it's the calls are similar. I mean, and similar in a way to what you would have done as an NGO. But if you incorporate as an LLC, then you have access, let's say, to the new wave of subsidies, because these are still development money. These are projects that still look like a development project. They have a budget. You can't just spend what you like. Even if you are a private company, you will win a grant, you will spend, or subsidy it's called in that world. You will have to create jobs to spend that money. It goes back into the economy, paying taxes. You are able to invest into some equipment, less so in operational, more so in growth and equipment of the and innovation in the company. I just put here two examples that I was familiar with. Startup Nation is a big, I think, funding over 10,000 companies in Romania, and Startup Diaspora. Startup Diaspora, we did participate and have experience getting there. It's a 40,000, I think it's up to 40,000 euro subsidy or grant. And like I said, it's a typical kind of pitch. It looks like a project for development in a way. In another way, it looks like a startup pitch, and it brings the two worlds together. Like something you'd do at Techstars or any accelerator incubator, except for the price is a bit higher, and also the price is constrained. Constraints being in terms of what you can spend, how you can spend. So before I just finish with that beautiful photo of my colleagues, a couple of things about the actual structure. If some of you are interested to actually dive in and get your name out there, start applying. This is my big advice. Start applying. Donors are very connected. Like I said, some of them fund each other. The structure of the fund behind each of the donors and development partners is very complex. So they're very connected, and they know and recommend among each other the best, most competitive solutions and organizations, really. And so the application is quite simple. It's either you think of it as a project application or as a tender book. And I do recommend that those who have been in the business of tenders and have worked with the state, selling to the state and submitting tender books, it's quite a similar experience. If you make a tender book of your organization, then you'll be able to easily adjust it to project applications. And it goes through the CV of the organization, your best people CV, your past project portfolio, and here, yes, you do have to be incorporated or registered for a couple of years to qualify for most of these, at least two. So, if you haven't registered your organization yet, that's the time, so that the clock starts ticking and you have those needed 2 or 3 years for most of these contests. You do have to have a couple of recent projects, so a portfolio always with the amounts or recommendations from those clients. So getting those first clients, or you can probably use them not necessarily as other projects or similar, but just your client portfolio. And the other part that's really similar between a tender and then the project application is your solution that you offer, right? So in a tender, you come up with your financial offer and your technical proposal, which includes your concept, how you're going to build this, your plan, your approach, how is it unique, and your timeline. And same in project, you want to show how the project fits the call. And most development partners and donors are very specific. They give a lot of details about what they want, and so you can easily build a good project from the indications in what their calls are about. Just the only thing they have extra is probably more information about the justification of your project, the civic and public need of it, and the sustainability of it, which usually in the tender world or commercial contracts is not out there. So if we're at the end, Artur, am I nearing the end of the time? Yes. Then I just want to mention again our social unicorn. So follow ZDG for all the non-fake news during COVID. They're a wonderful organization growing very fast, a media company that is active and is really, I think, making the steps that I'm talking about, growing from also from civil. They are delivering a public service and a civic sided service, but they are looking at the commercial exploration of it, of growing really a business, but still working with the development partners. So I think it's really the portrayal of the story I tried to tell you about what's going to happen in Moldova in the next couple of years, about how our NGOs and social enterprises that want to deliver a often non-viable commercial product or service that doesn't really sell. Let's say, people buy ZDG, the paper, for 5 lei, or some people donate for subscriptions online. But if you're out there and you believe still the civic need and the public need of your services out, or even if you're more commercial than that, you can be can build a brand, be credible, reach out to development partners, and get their support to grow to a commercial, to your commercial side, and follow the path of that I said of Romania into the world of SRLs and more efficient markets. Hopefully, back to capitalism someday. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Please, if you have some time, join our Q&A room and our Telegram chat, where participants could follow up with you. Have a nice day, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Artur. Have a nice day.